What's up, folks? So we started a menstrual cycle series over on Instagram, and I was going through those, making some infographics, and actually as I started this one I thought it was probably just easier to make a video and talk you through these points rather than make a load of infographics. So welcome back. Now today we're going to be talking through whether or not you should change your training due to your menstrual cycle. Now it may not be you that has this menstrual cycle, it may be some of your clients if you're a male coach, for example, or it may be that you're just interested in learning these things from a personal perspective, whether you want to implement them into your own training, or as I said, whether it is for a more client-based reason. But either way, let's get stuck in. So first and foremost, this is a question we get a lot, and it's quite interesting. Obviously, being a male coach, it's not something that I've experienced, but it is something that I've done a lot of reading about and have gained a lot of experience about over the past few years of coaching. And the most interesting thing I find with this is that for a lot of the females who have ever asked me this question as a coach, hey, should I be changing my training at the moment? Should I be doing something different? Should I carry on doing what I'm doing? It's very interesting because for a lot of them, I feel like they already know the answer. And that answer is, how are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? If you're feeling okay and it's all right, carry on. But I think because there is a lot of misinformation out there at the moment where people are trying to make things far more complicated than they need to be, it makes you double guess yourself. It makes you think, actually, am I doing the right thing? But the truth is, for some of you, yes, there's going to need to be a change made. For some of you, there's really going to be no need for any changes to be made. And the point here is that we use the data that our bodies give us to learn, adapt, have a new go at a new process. But what does the science have to say about this? Well, in 2020, McNulty and colleagues put together a meta-analysis. So basically they collected a bunch of studies that met the criteria for the study they were producing. So when you do a meta-analysis, effectively what you need to do is you can't just take every study in the universe and go, cool, we'll have a look at all of these. What they do is they go, right, what are our criteria? What do we want to find out? How do we judge that a study is good enough? So they'll write a list of these criteria. They'll search things like PubMed, journals, all of those types of things to try and find ideal studies to fit. Because effectively you want to be looking at research that investigates your idea better, not just that investigates the whole of the menstrual cycle, right? They want to be looking at things that actually add up, that mean that their research that they're currently doing is either going to be proven, disproven, so that we can have an answer fundamentally. A no is as important as a yes. And so when they're going through this kind of distillation of studies, it's important to get the right ones. So off the top of my head, I think they had 71 to start with, and they ended up actually narrowing that down to about 58, just because they would have picked these based off the criteria, and then some of them would have been narrowed down based on other factors. So what this study found, this big meta-analysis, basically found that people's training was most influenced by their menstrual cycle in the first 14 days, in what's called the follicular phase. Now, if you narrow that down again, it was most affected in the first 7 days. Now, that is where menses take place. Some people only have a period for 3 to 4 days, some people will be 5 to 6, and for some people it is the full 7. But it's that first 7 days where it is most impacted. When you actually get into the nitty-gritty of the study and you read how they did their methods and the results that they came to report, what they found was that the effect size was actually very trivial. Now, for those of you who don't know what effect sizes are, effect size is basically a way for the statistics of the study to be, how would we put it, to be analysed themselves. So you don't just look at a study and go, cool, I found out my result. You need to find out how significant that result is. That's something slightly different. But you also need to understand the effect size. Now, the effect size basically is done somewhere between 0 and 1. So the closer you are to 1, the more significant and the better the effect size. So if you had an effect size of 0.2, it wouldn't be very effective. If you had an effect size of 0.8, it'd be very effective. So the one that we had in this study was very trivial, so quite low, and therefore we can't say that the results of this study are, yes, the effect size was great, the difference or the statistical analysis was great, cool, we've got these two things, we can push forward and say, yes, we can say that with relatively good certainty from this meta-analysis that we need to make a change. But they couldn't do that because it was a trivial difference. Therefore, what they found was that actually, based on this study, there's not enough research, or at least good quality research, to suggest that any differences need to be made in training programs or how we look at the cycle of training. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean that if you're someone who really struggles with their period, that you just have to suffer on. It absolutely doesn't. Now, from a practitioner's perspective and from a coaching perspective, I've had clients who have had terrible migraines, terrible sickness during this time and can't get out of bed. I also have clients who are absolutely fine and they, have some cramps, but generally speaking, are not affected by it. So you have to take this on a very individual scale, on a very individual basis, because if you don't, you could end up making, if we made everybody have a week of lower intensity training, lower volume training, they could be missing out on 1 week every month where they could be improving, when in actual fact they don't need to have that week of downtime because they're at no loss either way. But there are of course other clients who really do need that week off or that week of lower intensity because they're so ill and they're so generally run down that they just can't output for training that week. So it's important you make those changes. From a coaching perspective, as I've said, experience through a lot of years has kind of taught me these two things, and the first one is communication is absolutely key. We can't change anything if we don't know about it, and equally it's important for us as coaches to open up to you guys and say, hey, how is this time? We have a lot of in-depth data that comes through on our check-in forms, and it's quite consistent that you can tell when people's time of the month is approaching, whether it's because we get a weight spike, whether it's because hunger goes up, and you can kind of say, hey, is everything okay? Do you have this very common around your time of the month, etc.? And try and be nice and open about that, because it's important that we have those good lines of communication to be able to facilitate a good coach-client relationship, but also for us to be able to help you and for us to be able to give you the best experience with training, but also the best progress in the long run. We can do that as long as we meet halfway, at least with these types of conversations. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, of course, we don't want you feeling like you have to go and train when you feel really beaten up, when you just can't get out of bed, when you've got terrible cramps. I would much rather we went for the winning and said, look, each time we have this, we'll just have a deload week. We'll just take that week, we'll rest up, we'll go again the next week when you're feeling much better. Something to just touch on real briefly, I guess, with this is that everyone will be so different. So your personal approach is the most important thing. Don't do what your friends are doing, don't do what this person's doing or that person's doing. See how you feel. Keep a training diary, make notes in that training diary to say, this month on my period, I felt great. I felt absolutely fine. Weights were flying. I was in a good mood. Cramps were quite bad, but generally I could use that to help. But actually, generally speaking, all good. Now, you might the next month go in, it might be that the cramps are so bad, they're quite distracting. You can't really get enough force out. You feel a bit uncomfortable and it's just not ideal for you to train in. So in that case, we make those notes and we collect that data. Now that might be an anomaly. So it might just be that normally your months are fine and you can train as you please, but we need a backup plan, because if you do feel a bit rough, what do you do then? And so knowing these things, collecting this data is really important, because you can take that and you can implement it into your training so that if you are feeling a bit rough, if you are feeling very uncomfortable, you have a backup plan. You don't just go, oh, I'm gonna have to struggle through here. You absolutely don't, because you already know that you can have sometimes a bit of a rough cycle, and therefore you've got that backup plan in place. Okay, I can't do this kind of training this week. I'm gonna go to my backup plan. No problem at all. Push on, make success, but also feel better as well. There's no point struggling through it all and trying to make the most of it. As a roundup of this video, I think the important thing is that from a scientific standpoint, there's no real data to suggest that you need to change your training. It's going to be up to you. It's completely your choice. How do you feel? How do you feel about training? Do you feel good physically, but psychologically you're not quite there, you're not feeling very comfortable? Are you feeling great psychologically, but in so much pain that you can't really perform properly? These are all good reasons why maybe you need to adapt your training and your approach based on your personal circumstances to get the very most out of your training, and in the long term, make the most gains without kind of struggling through and end up really hating the process. That's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. We really would appreciate it. And anything you'd like for us to produce for you in terms of this kind of content, then please, of course, do let us know. We'd be happy to help. And we obviously love sharing some education and helping out with this stuff. So until then, have a great day. Bye for now.